The truth behind Fatima's miracles. What science and history reveal in a quiet and picturesque town nestled among the gentle hills and endless cornfields of the American heartland, lived Dr. Evelyn Reed. In her early 40s, Evelyn carried herself with a sharpness of mind that far outweighed any sign of fatigue. Her chestnut hair, always tied up in a practical bun, framed a face made striking by thin-rimmed glasses and eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't a lab-coated scientist. Evelyn was a renowned historian and researcher of social phenomena. Her passion wasn't aimed at unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos, but rather at dissecting the intricate layers of human belief, how stories, whether religious or secular, shape societies and transform individuals. Her life's work had been to peel back layers of myth and tradition in pursuit of the truths that lie beneath. Despite her unwavering logic and deeply rooted skepticism, Evelyn harbored a strange fascination with the miracles of Fatima, not out of faith, but because of the event's massive cultural and societal impact. To her, Fatima was a perfect case study, like a living laboratory on mass hysteria, unwavering faith, and the tension between individual perception and collective experience. But her research, always aiming for a rational conclusion, kept running into gaps. Loose threads, minor details, small inconsistencies, none of it fit neatly into her cold, analytical worldview, and somewhere deep inside her, something stirred. A barely perceptible emotional resonance pulled at her, one she refused to fully acknowledge. This is where our story begins. Evelyn's journey started not in a church or shrine, but in her dusty office, surrounded by the scent of old paper and strong coffee. Ancient books, yellow documents, and piles of academic papers formed mountains around her desk. Each item was a clue in her relentless quest. She had just embarked on a new project, one that seemed harmless at first glance, a deep dive analysis of historical accounts related to the miracles of Fatima. Her university, known for its progressive stance, had enthusiastically endorsed the study. They expected a polished academic thesis, one that elegantly demystified the Fatima phenomenon. Evelyn saw it as her chance to finally tie up the loose ends that had haunted her for years. But the real conflict wasn't Fatima. The real battle was within Evelyn herself. They struggled between the certainties of reason and a slow, almost invisible opening toward the inexplicable. She had always believed that every piece of reality could be explained through science and history, but as she dove deeper into the vivid witness reports, the detailed descriptions of the miracle of the sun, and the innocent letters of the child seers, a seed of doubt began to take root. Minor inconsistencies started to appear, like splinters under her logic. What began as intellectual curiosity began morphing into something deeper, an existential questioning of everything she thought she knew. Evelyn wasn't just chasing facts anymore. She was embarking on an odyssey into the nature of belief and the very fabric of reality itself. Evelyn dug deeper into the archives. With each passing day, her frustration grew. She began encountering testimonies and reports that simply didn't fit into her strictly rational interpretation of the Fatima events. She had expected to find inconsistencies, perhaps even blatant fabrications, but instead she found something far more unsettling, an eerie consistency. People from different social backgrounds and varying levels of education described the miracle of the sun in almost identical terms. Their accounts were vivid and specific, the sun dancing in the sky, strange colors rippling across the heavens, and an inexplicable warmth that dried their soaked clothes moments after a heavy rain. Hundreds of individuals, many of them non-religious, or self-proclaimed skeptics, told the same story. Evelyn's biggest obstacle wasn't disproving the miracle. It was reconciling that remarkable consistency with the complete lack of a conventional scientific explanation. She consulted meteorologists, astronomers, psychologists. She scoured theories about optical illusions, collective hallucinations, and mass suggestibility. And while many of those theories offered partial insights, none of them could fully account for the totality of the reports, especially the sensation of heat and the wide geographic range of the witnesses. What could possibly explain such a convergence of perception? As her internal struggle deepened, Evelyn made an unusual decision. She realized that she needed to go beyond the documents, to go to the place itself. She booked a trip to Portugal, not to witness miracles, but to immerse herself in the atmosphere, the culture, and the social context in which the events had unfolded. Back in the United States, she had focused on data, but now she felt compelled to experience what the numbers couldn't show. And so she found herself in Fatima, walking the streets, visiting the sites, talking to descendants of those who had lived through the phenomenon. The air was thick with devotion. The mystery still lingered. During her stay, Evelyn met Dr. Joaquim Silva, an elderly local historian with kind eyes and a quiet wisdom. Joaquim had spent his life studying Fatima. Unlike Evelyn, he was a devout believer, but he was also an unwavering seeker of truth, a meticulous academic. He didn't try to convert her or win her over to his beliefs. Instead, he offered cultural nuance, oral history, and context. He spoke of the emotional scars left by World War I, of a people grasping for hope in the midst of despair. He explained how fear and faith often coexist, and how that psychological landscape made people more receptive to extraordinary experiences. The tension between them was immediate, but not hostile. They debated late into the night in cafes and dusty archive rooms. Evelyn leaned on her data and logic. Joaquim on the human need for meaning, the lived experience that defies easy explanation. Despite their differing worldviews, a strange friendship began to blossom, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to the pursuit of truth, even if they traveled separate roads to reach it. The core conflict was no longer just about the Fatima miracles. It was about the very definition of truth itself. Could truth be entirely objective and measurable, or was there room for subjectivity, for the raw power of belief and the emotional depth of human experience? Evelyn's worldview was beginning to crack. The turning point didn't come in a church or during a religious epiphany. It came on a rainy afternoon, in a musty parish archive in Fatima. She was alone, digging through baptismal records and dusty financial ledgers, looking for anomalies that might support her theory of a naturally explainable event, or perhaps even an orchestrated fraud. And then she found it, a diary. It wasn't written by one of the famous child seers, but by an elderly nun who had served in the local parish during the time of the events. Her name was Sister Sophia. The handwriting was elegant but shaky. The pages were filled with everyday prayers and observations, but also, crucially, with detailed entries documenting the days before and after the miracle of the sun. At first, Evelyn dismissed the diary as quaint folklore, just another artifact of religious imagination, but what stunned her was the nun's precision. Sister Sophia described unusual atmospheric phenomena days before the main event: strange lights in the night sky, erratic behavior in the farm animals, and an unseasonal warmth in the air. And this was before any public mention of apparitions or miracles. What shocked Evelyn the most wasn't the content, it was the tone. Despite being a deeply devout woman, Sister Sophia had recorded everything with the dispassionate clarity of a scientist conducting an experiment. She noted the colors, the timing, the reactions of others, everything in methodical detail. There was no poetic flourish, no mystical interpretation, just raw observation. This was the crack that shattered Evelyn's defenses. The diary didn't fit into any mass hysteria theory she had studied, nor did the atmospheric descriptions align with known meteorological patterns, and yet they were real. The nun's words painted a picture of something that didn't quite fit in any of Evelyn's boxes. Even more revealing were her notes on the children. She described them not as holy icons, but as vulnerable human beings, scared, confused, and deeply affected by what was happening around them. This humanization shook Evelyn. She had always seen the seers as abstract symbols. Now, they were just kids, fragile, honest, and unprepared. The diary didn't offer answers, but it opened an abyss of new questions, questions Evelyn had never dared to ask. It forced her to face the uncomfortable possibility that the truth might not lie at either extreme, not in the absolute certainty of science, not in the blind embrace of faith, but somewhere in between. With Sister Sophia's diary in hand, Evelyn stood at a crossroads, an existential one. Her academic training urged her to dismiss the nun's words as the reflections of a deeply religious mind. Maybe at best, they were sincere misinterpretations of natural events, but something in the clarity of the writing, in the sheer objectivity of the descriptions, refused to let her go. The honesty in those pages, paired with the disquiet building inside her, pushed Evelyn to consider something she'd never allowed herself before: a new framework. One that didn't rely solely on documentation, graphs, or logic. Against her own instincts and her carefully curated skepticism, Evelyn made a quiet, revolutionary decision. She would go beyond research. She would explore perception itself. She reached out to experts in human cognition, to neuroscientists who studied how belief influences experience. She interviewed anthropologists who explored mysticism and religious ecstasy across cultures, and in doing so, she began to accept something radical, that perhaps reality wasn't a single fixed structure, but a prism, seen differently depending on who you are, where you stand, and what you're open to. Her first step toward transformation was admitting she didn't have all the answers. Her second was admitting she didn't need to. The next pivotal moment came when Evelyn, with some hesitation, decided to share the contents of the diary with Dr. Joaquim Silva. She expected a religious reaction, tears, reverence, declarations of divine proof. But Joaquim surprised her. He wasn't just a believer, he was also a historian, and what he saw in the diary was not a confirmation of faith, but a valuable historical artifact, something that added layers to the Fatima narrative no one had considered before. Together, they began to trace connections between the observations of Sister Sophia and documented atmospheric anomalies from that period. They debated correlations, they compared timelines, they speculated without drawing conclusions, but through it all they never discarded the possibility that the miracle of Fatima was something far more complex than either science or faith could fully contain. Perhaps it was a convergence of rare environmental phenomena and heightened human emotion, of historical trauma and sacred storytelling. Perhaps the miracle was not the event itself, but the way it lived on in the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. This shift in Evelyn's perspective soon transformed her entire approach to research. She no longer viewed history as a linear progression of facts and dates. She began to see it as a living tapestry of emotion, memory, and belief. The desire to debunk faded. In its place came a drive to understand. She rewrote critical sections of her original thesis, openly acknowledging the gaps in her own interpretation and proposing a more holistic view of truth, one that embraced not just scientific reasoning, but also human experience. But she knew this wouldn't be welcomed by everyone, especially not by the gatekeepers of her field. And so, the final battle loomed. It didn't take place in a sacred sanctuary or under a dancing sun, but in the stark formality of a university auditorium. It was time for Evelyn to present her revised findings. The room was packed. In the front row sat her most skeptical colleagues, arms crossed, brows furrowed. Among them was Dr. Thompson, her former mentor, his expression cold, unmoved. Beside her on the stage stood Joaquim Silva, who had traveled from Portugal to support her. He offered a steady presence, his quiet confidence anchoring her amid the tension. Evelyn opened her presentation with calm precision. She reviewed the historical context, the social landscape, the existing theories. She presented her data and analysis as expected, but then came the moment of reckoning. She introduced the diary. With her heart pounding but her voice steady, she read aloud excerpts from Sister Sophia's meticulous notes, the lights in the sky, the strange warmth, the villagers' reactions. She showed the handwritten pages, projected onto a large screen, and then she did something unexpected. She overlaid those entries with climate records, astronomical data, and anecdotal reports from miles away. Patterns emerged, subtle but undeniable. "I'm not here to prove a miracle," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, "but to challenge how we define truth. What happened in Fatima may not fit into our existing categories, and maybe that's the point. Maybe it was never meant to." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It may have been the rare intersection of something physical, emotional, and spiritual, something amplified by desperation, faith, and the universal human need for meaning. At that moment, Dr. Thompson stood abruptly. His chair scraped the floor. His tone, sharp and dismissive, filled the room. "Dr. Reed, are you suggesting we base academic research on folk tales and hallucinations? This is a disgrace to scientific integrity." Evelyn didn't flinch. Her gaze met his directly. "No," she said. "I'm suggesting that scientific integrity requires us to expand our models when the evidence doesn't fit. That dismissing consistent, widespread testimonies simply because they fall outside our framework, that's the real intellectual dishonesty." The room fell into a deep silence. You could feel the minds shifting. There were no thunderous ovations, no grand applause, but there was something better: pause, reflection, a shared sense that a door had just opened. Not everyone agreed with her, but no one could deny the courage it took to stand there and say, "There may be more to this world than we are trained to see." The weeks that followed Evelyn's presentation were nothing short of a whirlwind. The academic community reacted with a mix of admiration, confusion, and sharp critique. Some of her colleagues, like Dr. Thompson, clung tightly to traditional frameworks, accusing her of blending speculation with science. But many others, especially younger researchers and those open to interdisciplinary thinking, saw her work as a necessary provocation. It sparked debates at conferences, inspired essays in academic journals, and perhaps most importantly, forced institutions to confront the uncomfortable question, are we studying history to confirm what we already believe, or to uncover what we don't yet understand? Evelyn's work began to gain traction in new circles. Her approach didn't offer definitive answers about Fatima. It offered something better, a framework that allowed complexity to exist, a model that didn't flatten experience into neat categories, but, instead, respected the blurred lines between the physical and the spiritual, the measurable and the meaningful. The consequences of Evelyn's work were far-reaching. She redefined the course of her own career, no longer boxed into a single discipline. Her work now bridged science, history, anthropology, and psychology, and in doing so, she helped spark a re-evaluation at her university about how mysterious historical phenomena should be approached. She hadn't solved the miracle, but she had revealed a deeper truth, that reality is multifaceted and that our pursuit of understanding should be humble, inclusive, and wide open. She hadn't proven or disproven anything supernatural, but she had illuminated the complexity of belief and the profound cultural power that even the most mysterious stories can hold. In the aftermath, Evelyn and Dr. Joaquim Silva launched a new research project together. They expanded their scope, studying other historical events labeled as unexplainable, looking for patterns in how human beings experience, record, and remember the extraordinary. Their unlikely friendship, a bond between the devout believer and the lifelong skeptic, evolved into a rich intellectual partnership. They didn't always agree, but that was the point. Their dialogue wasn't about finding the right answer. It was about learning how to ask better questions. And Evelyn's story didn't end in a dramatic reveal or a sudden conversion. The most surprising part was how the scientist who sought to debunk a miracle became transformed by the very mystery she set out to unravel. 10 years after that pivotal presentation, Dr. Evelyn Reed had become a respected voice in her field. She and Joaquim had co-authored several influential books exploring the intersection of belief and history, science and spirituality. Their work was required reading in universities around the world, from theology seminars to courses on epistemology and cultural studies. Joaquim, now older and frailer, continued to visit Evelyn in the US regularly. Together they continued to study, not with the intention of drawing final conclusions, but to celebrate the beauty of human experience, its contradictions, its longings, its awe. The small town where Evelyn had lived most of her life, once just a backdrop to her quiet academic routine, became a sanctuary for deep reflection, a place where she could think freely and reconnect with the essence of her intellectual journey. Her legacy wasn't one of proving a miracle or of unveiling some long-lost truth. Her legacy was that of a thinker brave enough to change her perspective, a scholar who proved that faith and science didn't have to be enemies, that sometimes they're just different languages trying to describe the same mystery. She continued to teach, but her lectures were different now. They weren't just about facts, they were about wonder. She inspired her students not to chase certainty, but to embrace the gray areas, to see ambiguity not as failure, but as possibility. She taught them that wisdom wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and being willing to change when those questions led somewhere unexpected. In her study, now more open and light-filled than it had ever been, Evelyn kept one object always within reach, the bound copy of Sister Sophia's diary. Sometimes late at night she would open it, not to find new revelations, but simply to remember. To remember how it all began, to remember the quiet voice of a woman of faith who saw something strange in the sky and wrote it down not to persuade, but to bear witness. In the end, Evelyn did find the truth behind the miracles of Fatima, but it wasn't the truth she had expected. It was a quieter truth, a human one, that the mind and spirit are capable of finding meaning in the inexplicable. That belief, even when it defies explanation, has the power to shape lives, communities, and history itself. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all was not what happened in the sky, but what happened in her heart.